So we didn't get a chance to film the install of the manifolds, but I'll go through a couple things that we did on ours. So the first thing to point out is the gaskets. When you order gaskets for this 4.2 Jeep 258 cubic inch motor, you will get two gaskets. Generally speaking, you'll get one that covers all the exhaust and intake ports, and you'll get another one that covers just the intake ports. Well, why is that? It's not an extra one, you need to use it. From the factory, they only put gaskets on the intake side. The exhaust was just metal to metal. But everything was machined flat back then. Now you're talking about blocks that are 30, 40, 50 years old. So, go ahead and put the long one on the bottom first. You'll get that same off-the-block spacing you would have if it was brand new if you use the intake gaskets. So use them both. You'll still have plenty of room for the locating pins on your intake manifold. And then the first thing I did is make sure I had a stud put back in this head on each side, which is what the book calls for. You can hang your exhaust manifold on the stud first while you insert the intake onto its locating pins, and then you'll be able to join the two together. The intake has two studs that point down, the exhaust has two studs in the back that point up. Follow the torque sequence. There's a big long torque sequence for all of these. It's in your factory service manual. The other thing is, this is an exhaust manual from '79 that had an air injection pump. Well, I still have the air injection pump, and I might put it on later, but I wanted to use the same intake manifold. So you have all these holes here. So each exhaust runner has a port for introducing air. Basically, it's an air pump, puts air into the exhaust after the combustion, and it will increase your oxygen through the catalytic converter and for your exhaust, and you look better on your emissions test, right? And California started that. We may go back to that. It doesn't rob a lot of horsepower to do that. But in the meantime, I've just plugged them 1/4 inch NPT. If you're trying to figure out what these are, they're not bolts, they're not cap screws, they're not machine thread. These are pipe thread. I bought the NPT S version, which are not tapered. Well, they're tapered, but they require sealant because the thread pitch is different, but they'll get you a tighter fit once they're in there. Anyway, looks pretty good. Those are in there. Everything's torqued to sequence. I replaced all of the cap screws, 3/8 coarse thread, with some new ones that have a shoulder on them, and using the factory washers. I did make them 1/4 inch longer than stock because of the gasket and because of the shoulder on the bolt. Measure the depths of your threaded holes. These are all blind, and none of them go into cooling jackets, but you need to measure them, the depth of them, and then measure the depth of everything bolting together and make sure you aren't going to bottom out your threads before everything gets tight. And it was fun. It looks good. Okay, everything's assembled and we're ready to start the process of building up oil pressure, moving oil through the block. And what we're going to do is, and what we've already done here actually, is threaded in a extra gauge that I had into the oil galley that the oil pressure sender usually threads into. Got our oil filter on. I pre-filled that and soaked it overnight, filled it up again. Close to a quart goes in that one. And then of course we will make our new tool that goes down into our distributor bore and engage the oil pump, and we will prime the system. So let's take a look at an oil pump when it's not installed. We're going to be looking down into the area where the distributor engages the oil pump. This is what we have to work with. When it sits in the block, it's pretty much flush. It's actually a little bit countersunk to the block. So what we're going to do is take this fancy cheap $5 flathead screwdriver with a round shank, or a hexagon shank works. We'll cut off the handle and we'll be able to chuck this in our drill. And then when we drop it down into the block, it's going to go into this groove for the oil pump, and we'll spin it. And we will move oil through the system. We'll verify that we have oil up through all the push rods and into our rockers, and we'll be confident knowing that when we're ready to start this engine soon, that we'll have oil pressure and all the bearings will be lubricated. Okay, so up until this point, we've actually kept the valve cover on. No gasket, we just kept it on every time we flipped the engine over. I didn't want a bunch of oil just dripping all over my plate that I made on the engine stand. So we're going to go ahead and take this off now so we can see the rocker arms and start to spin that oil pump and see if we can get some oil moving through the system. We'll also take a look at our gauge that we threaded in over here. Okay, let's take our fancy Chinese flathead screwdriver special tool, chuck it into the drill. See oil on this one over here. All filled up. Looks like it. Okay, as you just saw, we were spinning the oil pump. We've got oil coming up through all the push rods. All the rockers are full of oil now. As we slowly spin the crankshaft, we had plenty of good pressure even at a low RPM, so I feel confident that we have oil throughout the block and the head, and we can go ahead and clean up the surfaces for the valve cover and get it sealed up, put it together, and we'll get ready to drop this in the Jeep. Well, it's time to set the motor in. We've got it all hooked up. We've got a strap that wraps around the manifold, the intake manifold. It comes back over here to these bolts. This is how we took it out. These are all threaded in. Got our shackle here. We are hooked up to the engine hoist. We're going to start to move it in slowly and get this set in place. Once we get off the engine stand first, however, we're going to go ahead and mount the flywheel, pressure plate, and clutch. Okay, I think that's the right one. Okay, if it's in there and they're all lined up, that's all we need now. I'll take the ones, I'll start here with the Loctite, and I'll pull those other ones out and put Loctite on them. There's one. Okay, one more time around. Here we go. Okay, I think we're good. Sure doesn't seem very tight, does it?